With that, I actually get to invite some more community members up on stage, some folks that I really respect in the industry. We're going to be talking about agentic AI in media and entertainment. I want to invite Lindsay, who, if you haven't had the chance to connect with Lindsay yet, she's going to be moderating today's panel. She started her own media agency and she covers some of the latest in tech in AI. So Lindsay, please come up. I want to then invite Steve to the stage. Steve has been a mentor of mine for a very long time. Steve Keller, please come up. Eric Pace, Cox Media, please come up. And lastly, I want to invite to the stage, and I just lost the thing. I haven't had the chance to meet you yet. What was your name, sorry? Jessica Davis. I'm so sorry, my notes just left me. Jessica, we haven't had the chance to meet yet. Looking forward to hearing you speak today. Please come up. Thank you.
Who needs one? Here we go. Okay, great. So we all have microphones so you can hear every single one of us, which is wonderful. Thank you, first of all, to my panel for being here early this morning, for all of you coming in and getting a chance to really hear the future, right? We're learning about the future today. T did such a wonderful job introducing us all. Again, we've got Jessica Davis from Gannett, Eric Pace from Cox Communications, Steve Keller from Studio Resonate at Sirius XM Media, and just talking about where things are going, especially when it comes to media. And I do want to mention that in this past week, we had an AI presenter on air at Channel 4 in the UK. And so for news anchors who thought, well, you know, AI can't really replace what I do, I've always thought as a news anchor, yeah, I think we're going to see that day pretty soon, and it happened. So I'm going to kind of lay that down to start the conversation. It was interesting to me to see that it was a fully virtual human and not an AI of an existing human. I would hope that in the future we would see existing humans get a chance to maybe clone themselves and then come to these events. And so you have a real person as well as the AI. We are going to be diving deep this morning. So I want to start with a big question. I like to call this a lightning round. So we're going to answer this one kind of fast and then go a little more in depth. So for the entire panel, and Jessica, I'll start with you. What is the most significant change due to agentic AI in terms of how content is being created and also personalized?
Yeah, great question. And so Gannett includes USA Today and 200 local media brands across the US. So really, Agentic I like to think of as the hands. It can take action, whereas the chatbot AI that maybe some of us have been working with in our organizations is just the mouth, right? To do anything, we had to copy paste and take the action, and Agentic takes that next step. So when we think about, okay, what could this mean for media markets that have their challenges on resourcing? And so for our very local newsrooms, our smallest local newsrooms, one of the things that we did, we scaled our first AI agent, just to give you an example, is like, okay, what do we want more of for our local news markets? What do we want more of from our journalists? And it is really unique content. And so what we did is we built an agent using Microsoft Copilot Studio, and it allowed us to help our journalists file more public records requests. And what was agentic about it is that once the journalist checks off on it, it allows the journalists to rely on the agent to send the email, track the request, and then on our roadmap is to file the appeal if it's rejected. And so we've gotten a really big embracing of this first agent across our newsrooms because it helps them with something that we want more of in our local news markets. And that's a great example of how, when we can rely on something that we want more of in our organizations, how it can help us build up strengths that help us win.
As someone who has sent a lot of FOIA requests, it's like, wait, when did I send it? How long did they have? Did they respond? That's so helpful. Steve.
Yeah, I think for us, maybe two things. One, I work in an internal advertising studio within SiriusXM, and we deal a lot with creative briefs from clients, trying to come up with strategies and activations. And what we've seen with the AI tools is just our ability to go deep very quickly. We've built our own, we call it Brief GPT. So when a client sends us a brief, we can very quickly have it analyzed and see, where the client has put in a metric that doesn't at all measure what they're saying they want to measure. We can identify those things very, very fast. The interesting thing for me is that I found using AI, it gives me an opportunity to go deep very quickly. And what I've noticed is it's actually adding more time to my job. Because in the past, I may not have touched something because I was like, that's going to take me a week to do. I don't even want to go there. Well, now I can get it done in a few hours. So I'm adding a few more hours to my day because, I can go deeper with this. So it has me working through the weekends usually. On the other side, one other thing that I think is interesting is as we think about AI from a creative standpoint, and I'll talk about this in my breakout session a little bit later, we have an internal studio called Audio Go. It's meant for small businesses that maybe want to do audio advertising but don't have a lot of money or time to produce ads themselves. And this was something that we had humans doing for a while, but now we've got kind of an agentic setup where you can go in, get help writing a script with AI, have it voiced, have a piece of music, and there you have your ad. So it's interesting to see these things happening. I think the implications of this are really interesting too, but we can talk more about that later.
Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, so I agree with what these guys both said, so I'll take it almost to the other side of it because it goes beyond content creation and distribution. It's also changing the way consumption is happening. And as we build agents to learn, what we like to, not only like to consume, but how we like to consume it, and we have those agents compare it to other things that are relevant in our lives, it can start to highlight connection points that we never saw before. And even if you apply that on the enterprise side, we do things today where we have curation of content coming in from media. We identify the relevance of those things to whatever we have going on within our four walls, and then we can highlight those connection points to make stronger decisions, about the things that we do every day, all the way from, what it means to our business, all the way down to threat intel for security.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about implementation. So Jessica, AI is doing journalism in some capacity, right? In some instances, it's like writing articles. So at what point can you trust agentic AI to be fully autonomous?
So maybe a few years ago, we would have said, oh, no way. Actually, if you put the work in, what you put into AI is what you get out, right? So quality in, quality out. A lot of us know that. We've been around the block on this. And so if you set up your teams with the governance structure, with the guardrails, and you put in the work to work alongside collaboratively, AI and an employee or a journalist, you can get to systems that are more accurate than humans, right? When you look at, okay, how many errors do our journalists make? How can we fine tune an AI and what is its error rate? We can get to things that are very reliable just through the feedback loops that we set up. So we have done this, and for those smallest newsrooms, those are really our incubation areas where, okay, we have such a need to help our journalists in our smallest markets, and they're really open to this. So for when we get community announcements from the community, we had to walk away from this years ago. And so we're able to bring micro local news back. I'm talking about things like events happening at the senior center, things that, we just didn't have the time anymore to write about for the local newspaper. Those things are now possible again. And the feedback from the community is, just incredible on, hey, we're covering local news again. And so there's still that human in the loop, right? We haven't gone fully autonomous on that. But we see a future where these systems are more reliable, where The journalists trust its AI collaborator more and more, and as we give it more feedback, it becomes more dependable to us. So for now, we're still in the loop. And then, there's other areas where we're like, hey, we can be more autonomous, and that is like the public records request workflow. That's not yet audience facing, right? But that's a range there.
Exactly. On the TV side of things, I can tell you small newsrooms, you've got one person doing 3 or 4 jobs. So it helps to be able to get those local news items out to the community because they expect it. And you know what, let's go over to Eric. You are very hands-on when it comes to AI and especially AI agents. So what are you doing to ensure that AI generated content is remaining accurate, ethical, and of course free from bias?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Steve and I sat on a stage not long ago, and one of the things that we talked about then, back in January, was the fact that we started to double down early on responsible AI and putting practices in place relative to ensuring that those things don't manifest in whatever it is that we're doing, whether it's model use, chatbot creation, anything. And so what we're learning is 2 things are true. A lot of what Jessica just said manifests in how we think about it. It really does depend on how much effort you put into the thing that you create. So it all starts with ensuring that AI isn't doing what my fear is ultimately, which is not necessarily that it's eroding critical thinking in society. It's just proving that people can be lazy. And they ask a simple question, they get an answer, and they take their face value and they move on. And so if we can get past that and we can teach our folks that are doing the things that they're doing to put some time and effort into the way they write their prompts, into the way they build their applications, et cetera, then we can meet them halfway with the responsible AI practices that we put in place to ensure that things like our probe libraries are executed against the applications that we build. And for those of you who don't know, probe libraries are what we call responsible AI applications that execute some form of automated scripts that ensure that the answers that are being peppered against your AI applications or your models are producing answers that are not going to create problems from an ethical or other perspective. And there's ways to go do that from an open source perspective. There's ways to go do that manually. There's ways to do that in many different ways. But again, it starts with, do you want to ensure that it's not going to create a problem of ethics for you? And if the answer is, yeah, I don't want it to do that, then there are multiple means that you can apply to ensure that some of these things are safe. But the one thing that we, especially at our company, have continued to do is we continue to put humans at the end of all of these things. And so whether that's within our media departments that are creating news, right, via Axios or other, or whether it's just the stuff that we create internally, there's nothing that goes out without somebody looking at it first, at least not yet.
Are you ever concerned though, like if sometimes it's the human that's making the mistake, are you ever concerned about the human in the loop saying, oh no, that can't be right, but it is right, and then they might correct it?
Yeah, I mean, we were worried about that before AI, right? And again, it goes back to, how do you ensure that the people that you have on staff are putting enough effort and energy into creating a product that has the company logo, represented at the top of the paper, right? We have bad journalists, we have bad media creators, we have people that make bad movies, we have people that make bad movie choices. And so, one, you have to do your job before all of that starts to ensure that you're putting the right people in front of the AI that are going to help you ensure that your brand reputation is somewhat sustained. And that goes back to the accountability that we as leaders have to ensure that the way we are represented, our teams are represented, our companies are represented, all start with, do we have the right people still making decisions? And then, let the AI do its thing, but then ensure that before it goes out, it doesn't say something that you ultimately disagree with.
And it's the mistakes that often make the headlines, not the corrections or, hey, it works now. So Steve, you're focused on blending sound science with sound art to help people make sound decisions. Pun intended, and I have another one coming up. How is AI playing into the mix?
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you think of AI and the FOMO, the fear of missing out, and then FOMO, the fear of messing up. I think what we're finding is really kind of wrestling with, particularly in the creative world, how we deal with the impact of AI on creatives, on talent. We work with a lot of voiceover talent. the implications of synthetic voice or even voice clones. How are we being transparent, creating really ethical and equitable ways of using AI there? You think of AI in terms of music production. I mean, I'm in a Slack channel with our AI team that's working on vetting the music that goes on the Pandora platform. And I see how difficult it is for them to continually keep tweaking the algorithms to keep the AI slop from getting there for two reasons. One, just the millions and millions of music-related content that's being generated now, but also there's only so much money in the royalty pie. So if that's being taken up by AI and performance royalties are now dwindling and shrinking for human creators, how are we going to offset that? And so they're attempting to combat that and keeping AI off the platform. But then you have record labels signing deals with AI talent that have songs now on the Billboard charts. So do you keep that off the platform or not? So there are all of these questions that for all of the magic and the opportunity and the democratization that's happening, it's a struggle. And I'll also say that I do think while we can keep our critical thinking, we already know from academic research that there's cognitive atrophy that's happening. And I have, the head of our AI team, he's looking at how I'm using AI, putting things together, and he's like, Steve, I can build an agent that'll do that for you. And I'm like, I don't want that. Because part of the struggle and the interesting things that happen in playing what's not there versus what's there is what happens when I play with all these AI tools myself, instead of having an agent do it in the background. Now, could it do as good of a job? Sometimes, yes, but will I lose out from kind of learning that process? I think so too. And so what we're trying to do is find ways with our talent, because I think that's the other thing, is that AI has an impact on strategic talent management. And I think if ever there was a time to invest in human capital, it's now. But we have to really think about, as James was saying, how are we going to invest? How are we going to, help teams, and especially a younger workforce where entry-level jobs just are not going to be there? And what do we do to help them?
We've had all these platforms set up to empower people, but now we're seeing that shift, just as you mentioned. It's hard to distinguish the real humans from the AI. Some of it's slop, some of it's great, some of it's like, why is this here?
Yeah. Yeah, I worked this weekend on a project, and I wanted to mock up a piece of sound, and I had kind of done the research I'd done, and then using the AI, so I knew exact specifications of some things musically, where I was trying to pair music with a scent and also with a mood. And so I took the parameters that I had built and put it into one of the AI platforms to kind of spit something out. And I was floored by how good it was. Now, I would never have just taken that AI piece of music and put it out there. I would have given it to a producer and said, use this as your demo, but let's use some humans to pull it together. So it's amazing where the tools are, but we have to be intentional with their use.
Thank you. Jessica, let's talk about how you maintain trust and transparency. And we're talking about the music side, right? How do you trust what you're listening to? But when it comes to audiences, how AI is playing a role in these content decisions, and I understand that you have some new data.
Yes. Eric mentioned the audience side, right? The user behaviors are shifting. They shift slowly and then all at once, right? And so that very much for media, it's a little scary. It's like, okay, will our content be consumed, or our audience just seeking answers? How do we differentiate ourselves? And when we think about it, okay, what is important to your audience? So we did partner with Trusting News. They're an organization, a nonprofit organization, and we partnered with them on some deeper research on Gannett's audiences. And we had done some work before, and we knew our audiences, which tend to be older, more that, even our digital audiences tend to look more like our print subscribers. And like many, right, we have a challenge of reaching the younger generation and getting them to pay for news. And so when we looked at them, we knew, okay, there's a lot of skepticism about AI. And then when we went deeper with Trusting News, it was, still a small group so directional, but still more and more clear. The audience trusts our journalists more than AI. The audience understands that as they start to get more and more exposed to it, that these things make mistakes. And for brands where trust is really critical to our relationship, especially a paying relationship, right, where they pay for news, this is something that we can't sacrifice. And so it really confirmed our approach that in this data, it said, okay, they want transparency. They want a disclosure, and not just what we used AI for, why we used it. Time saved was not enough for the audience in saying, I want to know why you're using it. Why does it matter, right? So what's the benefit to me? So for us, we're using it to bring micro level local news back to communities. The why is we are able to cover more than we were with the staff that we have, and this may be able to fund even additional staff, right? By what we're still measuring our subscription growth, and we hope to have more data on that soon, but we're seeing some really promising signs. And so when we look at it, it's like, okay, you need to really understand your customer, and you may have a really aggressive vision for how you want your organization to use AI. What do your users think? And what is important? And that's the ethics of it, right? Okay, what's appropriate? And then how do we move? The really encouraging part of the data, though, was that as audiences became more exposed to AI, they became more accepting of it. So while a large majority of the audience we polled with Trusting News absolutely did not trust it, prefers journalists, wants to know when we use it because they want to make sure the journalists are checking things, they do accept it more as they become more exposed. So over time, right, this will get better. And then as an organization, it's not just what you're using it for, it's why. And that helps, right? But we don't want to, check our brains at the door. Anchoring to the why helps us become more strategic, right? So yeah, so a lot to learn from that, and we're really encouraged by the result, even though they are challenging.
I should mention too that the best way to support local news and independent news is to subscribe. Eric, let's talk to you about the partnerships that you're seeing between the tech industry and media organizations. Can you give us some insight into how these relationships are working long term?
Yeah, I think the key with big tech in particular, I don't know how many of y'all know or see, somewhere underneath a lot of what OpenAI, as an example, has done over the last several years is once they ran out of data, once they consumed the internet, once it was all done, they stopped and they figured out, oh man, we've got to go somewhere. And so they started creating their own versions of the internet and started training their models against those versions, right? They created the data that they needed to progress wherever they were going. And I think the same thing represents the future of where big tech and media are going. It's not a surprise to anybody that Amazon has been in the media business now for a while. They've started to create their own entertainment, right? Netflix has been doing this for a while. Over the summer, I don't know who of you read it, but Google created a thing called 100 Zeros. They're now in the media production business. And all of these guys are doing it to create data that will ultimately help them train their models, that will ultimately fuel the partnerships of the future. And the reason why these partnerships are risky is because you're subjecting yourself to the way those guys want to run, with the thing that you are going to value most, which is the data that you need in order to produce the things you're going to produce. But you're also going to be somewhat dependent on big tech like that because there aren't other companies that can do the things that we need with that type of data at scale. And so, unless you have billions in the bankroll to not only create all of these versions of the internet or create all of this novel content that you'll use to train your models, then you're going to be stuck somewhat doing some ticky-tacky stuff at the indie scale. And it's very difficult today, and it'll be difficult in the future. Now, a lot of the tools that we have are going to make it very possible and very entertaining for the indie markets to continue to create great content. The question is how are they going to compete against the size and scale of big tech that's partnering with all of now these companies that are creating content and data at a scale that no one else can achieve.
And you mentioned the partnerships, and there's also competition too, because if they're creating their own content and you're creating your own content, then what happens? So Steve, how do you strike the right balance between human creativity and AI-driven automation?
I mean, look, so much of it boils down to leadership. It's really hard in a company to deal with some of these cultural issues if you don't have leadership bought in from the beginning. But I think the essence of it really is we have to think as much about the implications of the use of AI as we think about the application of AI. We need to realize that data is not neutral. We need to realize that AI does have an impact on culture, and we need to look at what that means. DEI is not something that's in vogue in the current administration. And the danger, when it comes to AI is that we stop thinking about the cultural implications of who's creating the technology, what are the training sets, thinking about the impact on the fact that I, as a white guy, could have a script written from a cultural perspective and voiced with a person of culture without bringing any of those people to the table. And I think there's no really easy answer to your question other than it sounds simple, but it's really difficult. Awareness and then commitment. And we can get caught up in the short term, but we have to be looking long term. What's the data tell us about the impact on culture, on cognition, on our behaviors, and try and pay attention to that.
I think that's a really good note to end on, because it's something that we all should be thinking about as we move forward, because we're excited and dazzled with the technology, but what you mentioned and what all of you mentioned, it's so important to think about the ethics behind it and the intention behind it. Thank you all so much for sharing, for the new data, for sharing your insights with the audience, and thank you all so much for being here this morning.
Thank you.